Okay, we will jump in. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. So first, want to kick it off with some introductions. We have two guests here. We have Carson and Tristan. So Carson, let's start with you. You want to give a quick intro?
Sure, sounds good. Thanks for having me, Tristan and Marcella, to talk about this. I'm Carson Wilshire. I'm a senior data analytics manager at Branch Insurance. A little bit about Branch, right? So we're a property and casualty insurance company that's built on a scalable tech platform that supports our mission to make insurance less expensive, so more people can get covered. Due to our commitment to that mission, we've recently been certified as a B Corp, which is reserved for those companies with a focus and results aligned to social and environmental impacts. So our company is not just focused on shareholder return, but also for the communal good. So we're trying to restore insurance to its original intent, so a force for communal good. We've also been designated as a tech unicorn recently. So we were valued at over $1 billion, and we're still held privately. Something we're very proud of on both of those notes. Um, as far as our background, a little bit more on our products. So we're actively writing in about 36 states and sell auto, home, umbrella, renters, condo, and a few other product lines to date. And to summarize our competitive advantage, we can bundle insurance products in a matter of seconds, which ultimately makes the experience better and cheaper for our members. Me personally, I've been with Branch for about 15, 16 months at this point, and all that time as a senior data analytics manager within our data office. And we have a team of about, or I have a team of about 10 direct reports, and the data office as a whole is around 25 people, supporting the organization of around 500. And yeah, that's all I got there.
Thanks so much, Carson. Tristan, over to you.
Thanks, Marcella. Thanks, Carson. Really glad and excited to be talking and chatting with you both today. So I'm Tristan, co-founder and CEO at Castor. Before that, I was a data analyst, scientist with a few SQL and Python skills, but not that much. I very rapidly find out about the issue about having to pick people around in the organization to find my way through what existed in terms of data. And that's why I started out Castor 2.5 years ago about that. Since then, we've built a product, we've built a team, we've raised more than 23 million euros, and we're now over 40 employees at Castor. I'm leading the customer-facing side of things at Castor, speaking with prospect, client, customers, users, a lot of different data people in the ecosystem as well. And very glad and excited to talk about data democratization today.
Awesome. Thanks, Tristan. So if you haven't guessed yet, I'm your moderator for today. My name is Marcella. I work on growth here at Castor. So going to leave the majority of the talking to Carson and Tristan, but do want to level set for kind of about 5 minutes with all of you here today, just to make sure we're all on the same page entering the conversation. Before I do that, I do want to emphasize that questions are encouraged. So you can submit them throughout the session using the questions bottom. If you look at the bottom right screen, you'll see a little button, and you can submit your questions through there. So let's get to it. First, always like to start with a little bit of a definition. So what is data democratization anyway? And I think this quote by Louise on our team sums it up really well. So whether you call it data mesh, data sharing, or data democratization, the idea is the same. It is about giving business teams access to data to help them make data-driven decisions autonomously. And so why do we care about this? Well, we have a couple stats here from Gartner. First one being that Gartner found data and analytics leaders who share data externally generate 3 times more measurable impact than those who do not. So 3 times in terms of economic benefit is huge. And everybody has pressure on them, and especially today's economic environment, to deliver results. So that is a big stat here to think about how you can bring your impact to the next level. Second, and I promise it's only 2 of 2, is that the problem here is that less than 5% of data sharing programs will correctly identify trusted data and locate trusted data sources. So what that means is that a lot of organizations are inhibiting access to data, there's silos, and actually discourage data sharing in one way or another. And so unsurprisingly, that undermines that effort to maximize value from your data. So you've all joined, I assume, to learn how to approach this problem. And so we want to start just with 3 principles. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to get too into the weeds here outside of talking about a little bit this high level concept and what the principles first approach is. So first, everyone should have access to relevant data, not just certain roles or job titles. Second is that there should be no barriers preventing people from getting the data they need. And then finally, data should be organized and structured so it's easy for anyone to understand and use it. And so then the last thing I'll leave you with here before closing out and having this be a fun conversation for everybody to participate in is that, data discovery does fit into the picture here. And that's why we talk about democratizing data discovery for this hour. And we have a bit of a diagram here to show exactly where. So you'll see that first and foremost on the left-hand side, data quality is the backbone, because if the data team can't use the data, sharing it with others will be a useless exercise. So that could be a whole conversation on its own. We're not going to get into that today, but we are going to get into this right-hand spot here, which is about the data discovery piece. And so that's all about getting that good quality data to the business teams. And what we mean by data discovery in the context of data democratization includes, rich context around the data, making sure that there's a good accessible interface to explore it, and making sure that, all of those principles are actually available to the business teams. So our goal for today, learn how to approach data democratization and discovery to set your team up for success. And with that, I will close out the slides. Thank you for bearing with me, and we will get to the fun part of the conversation, which is the discussion. So Carson, let's start with you. Tell us a bit more about how the data team is structured at Branch. You talked a little bit about it in your introduction, but if you could just add a little bit of context as well around where you are in your data democratization journey at Branch.
Yeah, sure. So our data office right now is structured more toward the stakeholders that we serve from a centralized standpoint. And we're really trying to break that down and become more decentralized, right? We're still early on our journey. But I think the most important thing is the intentionality here, and where we want to get to very soon, and where we're heading. So I hope we can do this panel again in a year and see how far we've come kind of on our journey. So the structure is, we have two teams that are supporting various stakeholders within our company, and they're aligned more on the growth side, so like front office analytics. And then we have also a team that I support, which is more back office and product related for our insurance. And both of those teams are headed again by data analyst managers. And then we also have a team in the middle that is supporting our data operations to make sure that we're never siloed between the two different focus areas. And they also have a very big and important process of this data democratization journey to ensure that we have the proper tooling in place, as well as like core schema, stuff like that. And it's overall accessible by anybody that needs to tap into it for decision making.
Awesome. So to play that back, sounds like you have a lot of different teams supporting the business teams, the back office teams, the data ops centrally. And as you're thinking about it, just to kind of add a little bit of context, beginning, middle, event, or end, where would you say you're on your data democratization journey?
Well, I don't think this book's been written yet, as far as a perfect solution. So we'd like to approach things with a V1 mentality at Branch, and I'd say we're a V1.5 at this point. We're still iterating, but again, I think the intentionality is there, and the strategic objectives are in place for us to get there, even more than what we have. But from previous experiences in other companies, I'm very, very happy where we're at, but we're definitely not done.
Awesome. So to put that into a little bit of a kind of broader context, Tristan, would be great to hear from you. You have a lot of visibility on this from talking to a wide range of clients. As you mentioned, you are leading the client-facing efforts along with our great team here at Castor. And so when you think about the full journey, end to end of data democratization, what would you say are some of the key milestones or inflection points that are pretty typical on that roadmap if somebody was drawing it up?
That's an interesting question, and especially an interesting way of formulating it end to end. The first struggle is defining where it starts and where it's supposed to end, or at least where it starts. In the journey and in the roadmap, the very first and obvious beginning is just assessing what data means to my organization, what data means to my stakeholders, what data means to different people in the organization, and who's using what. Sometimes there are already some data efforts driven by marketing, by the product. They're using their own internal tool. They're using their own little dashboard in their tool. And even before there's even like a structured and formal data team, there are already data skills in the organization. And assessing this is a very first important step that is already providing value to the end users. People, business are already using the data without even a data team. How you make that scalable, how you make that accessible for the other people in the organization. So assessing is the very first step in that roadmap. Then there's obviously the strategy about where you will have the most impact. Maybe the marketing team has already most of the value they need. They don't need additional data. So you're going to start with another team where there's less skills, and the product might be in need of such skills and data that they cannot extract easily from the software and the production database. So the strategy, define the strategy once you know what exists already. And then the other really important that you have to get right at the very, very beginning, and I'd say it's maybe the most important milestone, is making sure you have the proper culture. It can be pushed by leadership. It always goes when it's pushed by leadership, but you don't want to fight a battle that's lost from the beginning. You want to make sure people agree and are willing to work with data. You don't want to become the support team for anything internally. Otherwise, you're just going to get overwhelmed by the number of requests of dashboard that are going to be used or not going to be used. So you really want to push for not only the tooling and the processes, but also just the people side of things of let's become data driven. Let's think about data in a strategic way. Let's think about data as a strategic differentiator or competitive advantage for our company. And it has to be central to the culture of the company. And then comes the more classic tooling infrastructure debates that we know about, that the industry has been improving a lot recently. But I think starting with those three really, really important points is essential. And sometimes data leaders, data team notice this or are still struggling to get those three first important steps, even after a few years, even down the line, because afterwards it's always about just monitoring and iterating on, hey, after 1 year, after like in a year from now, once we've pushed the BI tool, what's more and more users are using the data that has been structured by the data team, where are we at? What is actually being used? Who is actually using it? Do they rely on what we provide them with? Are they happy and do they trust what they're using? They, meaning the data consumers, the people who are going to work and consume and take decisions based on data. And same thing. Where are the skills? Is the culture good enough? And are we doing some build and not only run answering requests? And always, planning in advance. So I tell you, those would be the three very important milestones and things that you must start with, and you still need to iterate over those as you run and as you open data to more stakeholders in the company.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of getting all of those and it is end to end, but that cycle then starts right back at the beginning. So maybe it's a bit of a cycle versus that end to end. And I like kind of, assessment, skills and strategy, culture, tooling and infrastructure. And then of course, understanding adoption and feedback, and then going back to the beginning to make sure that adoption and feedback is a virtuous cycle. So Carson, let's kind of talk about where data discovery fits in to your team and ways of working at Branch. That's a bit of a jump to that tooling piece of the journey. I'm curious what your data stack looks like right now and how data discovery fits in. It'd be great to get a little bit more context on that from you.
Yeah, and I'm glad Tristan hit on the culture side of it, because I think that is really important. And what we're really talking about here is arguably the two most valuable assets of any company, right? Your people and your data at this point. So it's kind of the intersection of both when you talk about trying to get to a point of data discovery, self-service, and business users being empowered to use the data as they see fit. What we try to do before I get into like our actual stack is we tried to make sure that it's a tailored solution for everybody out there. And Tristan was hitting on this too. All the different stakeholders that you have in your business have different degrees of skill sets and wants and needs. And you do need to assess that and then tailor your approach for your customer. And for most data teams, it's a shared service center, right? So you got to know your customer that's internal and where they are on their journey, and support them with that tailored solution. Within the data office, more specifically, we've really embraced kind of the modern data stack. So most of the stuff that we try to put in place around our warehouse, starting with ELT, ETL is fairly low code. Right now, we leverage two tools specifically, Fivetran and Rivery. Rivery we just kind of evaluated recently, and found some pretty good use cases there. But Fivetran's kind of our engine right now, and it is very, very low code configuration based. And I would argue almost anybody on the business side. In fact, I'm a business backgrounded person. I'm not a tech backgrounded guy from my schooling. They can all get in there and do this work if they want or need it. But that's primarily reserved for our data office from a centralized standpoint. And we leverage right now BigQuery for our storage. And we do most of our transformations at this point with SQL within views of the warehouse. Um, and then we have a lot of other peripheral, that's kind of our main thing, right? And then we have a bunch of peripheral tools that we leverage, one being Anomalo, which helps do data profiling, alerts, automated testing, and making sure that we're able to minimize tech debt whenever we're putting these solutions in place, these typically SaaS products. And most of the ones like Anomalo, we also have a use case out there with Tantal that we're leveraging. All of them plug into Slack. That's our communication hub. And we're able to build out automated processes, exception reporting, alerts, and all that, and feed them into Slack to get proactive monitoring. Um, Outside of the warehouse, going more into the reporting layer, we primarily leverage Click right now for our data visualizations. Very powerful tool. I've used a bunch of them over the past probably 8 years. Tableau, Click, Power BI. They're all at the point where they're competitive with one another, but they serve the same purpose. It's just a tool, in my opinion. So we use that for most of our reporting out, our dashboarding, and there's a lot of workflow capabilities and automation capabilities there too. Um, the only other one that I'll mention is we do use an iPaaS solution. So Workato to do some reverse ETL work, workflow solutions, automated solutions. And then, of course, not last but not least, is to help with our governance, is we've really tapped into Castor, and it's been a huge win for our internal team to get people onboarded faster, leveraging your product, but also when I was vetting the solution as well as our CTO, it was immediately apparent that it's geared toward the business. And for them to have that bridge into the data office, and have that outlet almost, and Castor really bridges that. So it's definitely part of our stack, and will be very vital going forward for our success.
Awesome. I love to hear that, because, Castor, we do always talk about making sure that the data is accessible to everyone. And so it's interesting that that was part of your decision-making process, as well, and kind of shows the realization of our attempt to make data broadly accessible, actually, being recognized. So love to hear it. Before kind of getting into more questions, I do want to mention that there are some questions coming through the polls, re-emphasizing that if you have any questions for our panelists, that bottom right questions button is available, and people are using it. So get your questions in and we'll get to them at the end. So switching gears a little bit, Tristan, when you think about kind of success stories out there today, what do you think about? How are the best teams using data discovery to their advantage? So, what makes an effort go from good to great?
So the true success of a data catalog, the true success of a data discovery tool is when it's the portal to anything data. It's when people do not go and ask the data team, but try to be autonomous and use Castor to dive into the data and take the decision by themselves. And that's where you actually reach that end goal of true data democratization, where people do have access to the data, do understand what they have, and feel confident with the data they're using. But in order to go there, we have to obviously onboard those different users, get that adoption, and that can be pretty tough sometimes, especially since, and we've seen it with branch stack, there's a lot of tools already. How do we fit it? How do we bring another tool on top of all the one that you've known already? And one of the key critical traits that I've seen throughout the success, common trait, is how we get close and familiar to the ecosystem that the data consumer have in front of them. If they have a dashboard, how we show them on the data discovery what's relevant for their dashboard. Start from what they know, start from the system they know. Sometimes people don't have any clue about what's a data warehouse, what's SQL, what's a table, but they do understand what an Excel spreadsheet is, and they can understand what the table and columns are. So you don't want to show the full complexity of a data warehouse, but if you need to know where the data comes from, you still need to understand roughly some part of the lineage, so where the data comes from. I have my dashboard, I have a number, I want to know whether it actually comes from the system I know, Salesforce, Zendesk, whatever, or if it comes from somewhere else. So it's trying to get close to the systems, whether it's the BI tool on one end or the source system, the Google Ads for a marketing team, the Salesforce for a sales team, the product taxonomy, the product naming convention that the product team has, how you get close to that so that they feel really familiar and they, in just a few minutes, understand what Castor is about, what they can find, what data discovery is about, what they're supposed to look for, because sometimes you have access to this tool where you can look for things, but what are going to be the results? So it's really how you get really close to the environment and how you get familiar in just a blink of a second, in just a blink, with the ecosystem and with the people that are supposed to use the product. And that's super important in order to foster the adoption, which is the end success of such a tool.
Got it. Yeah, I think any tool wants to have broad adoption, but it's interesting to kind of hear about how you get it. And in the context of a full data team, it's about speaking the language of the people who are using it and making sure that it's able to be understood in the language that people speak, whether they're in marketing and finance, on the data team themselves. So interesting to think about that as a lever for driving adoption and getting to that 3x impact that is really the goal from a data sharing initiative. So Carson, we've talked kind of a bit at a high level now for a few minutes, and I'd be really interested in hearing more about what this looks like in practice. So are there any specific initiatives your team has taken on where you've seen benefits to improved data discovery?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Marcella, before I get into that, I think Luca had a question that's pretty relevant to this topic as well as the one prior. And Luca, you're asking how have we used Caster to bridge toward the business? Can you run through an example? So what we're doing right now with any of the products that we put out, specifically around dashboarding, we put a link, basically a button that says, "Hey, here's the data dictionary," or I forget the term we use on all the dashboards, but it deep links us to the Caster page for that particular dashboard itself, and we put all of our logic in there. So and it's translated in business terms, like Tristan saying, you have to meet your customer again with the language that they speak. So in the README section, for instance, we write all of our assumptions, our key pieces of information and business logic that we put into this. That's oftentimes before the actual visualization layer, right? It's kind of between code and data visualization. That we're explaining there and what our assumptions were. And I think it's really bridged that well for the business user. The other thing is once you go into Caster, right there on that README section, it has all the pinned assets. It has the lineage of what's flowing into that end report. And then we also bring in the business users to do reviews on our write-ups too. That's something that I was very big on, hitting to what Tristan's saying. Like, it needs to speak the language of the business user, because that is where the decision making and the empowerment needs to happen, right? So Luke, I hope I covered on that as one example. And then Marcella, going back to your overall question, right now what we're trying to do in practice is, again, I told you we're in kind of a V1 1.5 right now. We have a lot of rebuilding that we need to tear stuff down, rebuild it in our warehouse house itself. So that data operations team that I was mentioning is doing a lot of work there to drive us toward fewer sources, less sources out there, and really get to a source of truth in our infrastructure, core schema, and then what I'd call like a BI reporting layer of our data set, so that the end user can tap into fewer data sets. They don't have to do as much complex joins and stuff like that. We take care of the heavy lifting and let them tap into us as a platform to get what they need out of it. So minimizing sources, synchronizing the output to reports. There's probably so many people that run into this same question, like why we're trying to be, data enabled and self-serve here, but why are there so many sources? What is the source of truth? Why does it say something in this report versus that report? Again, Caster's helping us bridge that, because we lay out the logic there, and then the business user can be like, oh, okay, it's a little bit different logic, right? That's an explainable difference. We're also looking at right now DBT to layer on our stack to do more of our transformations outside of the production warehouse, and kind of have a stopgap for code review and versioning control. So beef up a little bit more of the governance side. But I hope that answers it, Marcella. And I think more so the people that we're trying to build out around our platform is the most conducive to data democratization. But as far as like what we're focused on a centralized standpoint, it is simplifying things in our warehouse and making it a platform that the different customers can tap into with a tailored solution.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question around kind of the initiative is getting the visibility so you can minimize the sources and be able to kind of synchronize that output. So you did mention a little bit about the data ops team really working on driving towards those fewer sources. So that kind of leads me to my next thought here around structure, because I'm sure most people thinking about data democratization are thinking about, all right, like, how do we layer the people into this equation? And so is Branch going for like decentralization, centralization, hybrid model? What is your team structure looking like in that? Hope that's something that you can share.
Yeah, I no problem there sharing that. So I think there's always needs to be a component of a data team that, or kind of the whole data product within a company to have a centralized component. The question really is like, how much needs to be centralized, and what are the different roles and responsibilities versus the decentralized components versus centralized? So short answer is we want it to be hybrid. I think that probably makes sense for almost every company. Decentralizing too much, then you run into governance issues. You run into problems on source of truth, etc. And then when you centralize it too much, you frankly can't meet the demands of the customers, right? You're gonna miss on requirements. You're not close enough to the business problems to solve the solutions themselves with data. So we're looking at a hybrid, and we're doing it slow so we can pivot fast if need be. But something I'll throw out is like embedded analysts, right, within the different areas to help them self-serve. They're tied into me indirectly or directly from a reporting standpoint, but they are embedded with the functions themselves to get what they need on a faster scale or a faster pace. And then again, we're always going to have some components that are centralized, and that's really where the data operations team between myself and my colleague really shine, because again, we need to make this a platform. The data office needs to be a platform that anybody can plug into. So that's kind of the structure, more of a hybrid model.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, being able to have some level of control and consistency from the centralized perspective and the data ops, and have those embedded analysts with a line in for that consistency and support. And I'm sure kind of coaching and career development as well. And then also being able to be close to the businesses. So love to hear that. And Tristan, kind of thinking about that hybrid model. When you see this type of structure in a lot of different data teams, what types of factors are most important to reduce silos and smooth out the data team bottlenecks? Make sure that communication between the central and decentralized elements is running smoothly.
Yeah, well, Carson started to mention a few of them already. He's definitely down the good path, but yeah, indeed, clear communication between the team, having a shared vision, shared goals is super important. I guess even though you're embedded in different teams, you might report to someone in the central team, and then increase the cross-functional collaboration. You can have roles, you can have responsibility in the business team, but reporting as well on cross-functional to some people in the data team is super important. There's a few other topics that are extremely important, more on the how you make sure you keep those roles and responsibility and people accountable for what they are building, is obviously the ownership regarding the technical assets, but regarding the definition as well, in a hybrid model where you have a platform team, let's say, responsible for providing the data, and embedded analysts that are close to the business, because that's where they know the definition, the rules of computation of particular metric. You need to have this ownership, this responsibility well defined in a tool where you can ask and review and potentially discuss about the definition and the technical implementation. And at the same time, you need to have this visibility over who is doing what. The most important thing is you have the communication, but you have the visibility as well, throughout the data discovery tool, throughout who is using what are the most important assets in a specific team or for a specific person, what are the definitions that are that are owned by a specific domain or by a specific team. That's super important. And the last part, and again, Carson and Branch are going in that direction, is the standardized processes and tools. And we see most of our customers with DBT, but obviously you want everyone to be on the same page. And as long as you follow the path of having the same tool, it increases obviously the collaboration just from a technical standpoint, but just also the visibility. If you're working on the same repo, if you're working on the same tools, if you have visibility over what your colleagues and other people in the organization is doing, it prevents the silos, it prevents redoing dashboard that already exists. It prevents, so first, confusion of having two dashboards with the same number, but also just overall cost of having twice the same table, twice the same query. So the visibility is very important. And I think that's one of the key things that we bring to the teams we are addressing with Castor is visibility over what exists, basically. Where you're supposed to start and what exists, what has already been done. In fully decentralized team, that's where the struggle is you have so many replicas, so many things that are supposed to mean the same thing, but that have different numbers. And that's where it's super hard. And on the other hand, if you're too centralized, it's very hard to get to those business users and truly find the definition that match what they are thinking about. So I think what Carson has highlighted in terms of people, tools, and processes is the right path.
Yeah, I like that. And I like adding on kind of visibility as a really key element of communication. It's not just about if you ask something, you know who to ask it to and you get the response, but that if somebody else is looking around, like they have that visibility as well. So that way, it actually reduces the number of questions going in different directions. But on the topic of visibility, Tristan, it's not really uncommon to think that people might have some stress or some hesitation to broaden that visibility to a huge stakeholder group. So how do you think about ensuring that those silos are broken down, that you have that visibility there while ensuring things don't get chaotic?
So that's a good question. Should you go for full transparency over the entire data of your company, or should you try to hide a few things? I tend to be on the extreme of full transparency. We've seen it working in very successful organization, very large and successful organization. The biggest tech companies in the world have this idea of everyone can see what exists in the stack. Doesn't mean that you have access to it, but at least you know what exists. Knowing what you don't know is the first step of at least what you should know. That's kind of the philosophy as well, is really giving visibility on what exists, not to the extent of maybe accessing the data, because afterwards you land into the compliance, security, access management topics and matters, but at least knowing what exists, knowing what's important for your organization. You can have obviously a prioritization of what you should use, some suggestion about where you should look at first, and obviously with the number of tables, with the number of tools, with the number of insights that are produced in a company of the size of Branch, but even smaller companies, it's impossible to just grasp everything that exists in the ecosystem. But being personalized in the approach, having some kind of tool and automation into guiding people through where they should have a look at without hiding it. If you want to dig deeper, if you're just a dashboard user, but you want to dig deeper into what's behind your dashboard, because those are the typical questions that a dashboard user would have. I think it's very important that you give visibility to the stakeholders and to what exists. It's also a way for the platform team, the data engineers to shine, because if they are too much in the shadow, their work is not rewarded as far as everything they are doing is concerned. In the amount of work that they're doing in setting up data quality and setting up the pipeline, if no one has access to it except just a few analysts that are providing the dashboard to the end users, it's also really important to show to the company the entire work and the logic that has been built in the pipelines and the robustness of the pipeline that are provided for data in the company. So I think I'd be more on the extreme side of giving a lot of transparency into what exists at the metadata level, obviously. And that's one of our strong beliefs at Castor, is that from a metadata standpoint, since there's no no compliance or no security issues, this should be something that needs to be available, and that is much more valuable than if you try to hide a few parts of things that are too complex or that shouldn't be understood. It's prioritizing, suggesting, guiding people through what's relevant, but not hiding to the extent of this doesn't exist in the company.
Yeah, I like that. Making sure that there's a clear separation between the idea of visibility and the idea of access, where visibility is something that can be broadly shared. Access is something that, from a governance perspective and a security perspective, might need to keep tighter reins on. So actually, that gets into a question, Carson, from Thibault in the audience. He actually asked, what are your data access management challenges at Branch in the context of data democratization? I think that that's an interesting question, feeding off of Tristan's comments. Curious if you have thoughts on that. And thanks, Thibault, for the questions. And anybody else who would like to submit, please do.
Yeah, I think we're in the same camp, Tristan. We try to be as transparent as possible and give. We're kind of liberal on access too. Like we like to give people again more access than I've probably seen in other companies, but it is intentional, and it's because we want that organic um, you know automation opportunities or data discovery opportunities to happen within the business areas. So we obviously try to minimize and not run into any compliance issues and have everybody access to our production warehouse. That wouldn't be smart, but I think Click does a pretty good job on the governance side too, and getting people access to what they need and being able to self-serve and explore in those apps as well. But we kind of take the stance that we're going to try to get it out there and be as transparent as possible, like Tristan was saying. Um, and I don't know if I can speak to any like specific challenges. It's more of like keeping up with the fast pace of the amount of needs that everybody has. So I think it is like it hits on the culture that we have here as Branch. Like everybody is trying to be data driven here. And it's like the first thing that people go to is like, I need data around this. It's not the second or third after intuition kicks in and maybe we don't make the right decisions. It's immediate. They're like, I need data on this. I need it now. How do I get it? Where can I go? And they're all trying to self-serve, so it's pretty refreshing. And then, Tristan, you were mentioning, I think, a lot of again the value that we see in Caster, answering Luca's question too, on that transparency of metadata and how Caster fits in there. And my goal is, like, of course, my analysts, the data office analysts have access to Caster because they need to put the inputs in there and define some of these columns. But my goal is that would flip, and eventually there would be way more business users in the tool than there are tech folks, and it can kind of organically move in that way with the business driving their needs into that tool. And it's a bridge, I'm telling you, and full transparency is out there. They can look at anything they want from a metadata standpoint, like Tristan was saying.
Awesome. It's cool that the team at Branch is already in the mindset of starting with data. Where does the data come in before I start thinking about what the decision is and backtracking? So to that end, Carson, I think there's a lot of buzz out there about data as a product. So, having data producers and data consumers and data product management, and there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. It's a lot of buzzwords, but how do you really interpret this approach at the fundamental level at Branch, so that way you can bring that product development mindset to your work across the data team and allow those data consumers to start with data?
Yeah, and I think first and foremost, like what I said earlier, I truly believe data and people are the two most valuable assets. So if you think about that, um, why would it, not make sense to treat your data as a product? And I think once you do treat it as a product, then you bring in that intentionality, you bring in that strategic thinking of, we want to get over here, we're right here. What do we need our data to help us carry ourselves over to the end state? And another thing that was mentioned was the accountability side. I think when you treat data as a product, and you have the stakeholders themselves, the business users per se, owning that product itself, it puts some accountability on them to help make it better and to relay what they need. And it does bring data into the front of the discussion rather than the end. Um, but I think just the thought of it being a product, and again, setting up some culture around, like, that's what we believe here at Branch. It does help us maintain some of that decentralization that we're striving for, because it gives measurable opportunities, measurable objectives, and outcomes that they want to see as it pertains to their data. It's theirs. We don't own it in more of the tech side. It's the business data here at Branch. So it brings their voice to the table too. I think that's key as well, and they don't feel, again, like, hey, there's IT over there and then it's business over here, and it's so siloed, and there's always this like conflict in the middle. um, when we label our data as a product, and that the business owners or the business areas are the owners of it, um, it tears down all those walls, I think.
Awesome. So I hear a lot of those product management, almost software product management types of themes coming through around accountability and ownership, measurable objectives and outcomes, taking the customer voice and starting there to build for those customers, and making sure that what you're doing is truly in service of the business. So I think those are a lot of really good themes to bring through and think about. Tristan, anything to add on your end in terms of kind of connecting those producers and consumers of data in the organization?
Yeah, that's very interesting because Carson just mentioned the accountability and the ownership of the business users. It's often the case that we consider data engineers and data platform teams as data producers, whereas if we go even a step further, business users can be considered as data producers. When we have a look at most of our client stack, the data that is in the warehouse and the data that is broadly used in the organization come from the production data from the tool in the tech ecosystem, or the third-party tools. And usually the third-party tools are tools that are also used by the business users. So they are the one writing down data within HubSpot or Salesforce that comes to Snowflake and then, or BigQuery, and then go back in the data product in the end, in the dashboard. So giving that accountability on the data product at the end, but also at the beginning, makes them feel that, yeah, once you have the visibility on that whole, well, not lineage, but travel of the data, it's very interesting that data consumer can also be data producers. And like the data quality issue, the data contract debate at the moment, it also boils down to who's the actual data producer. When you talk about the data that is within those rows extracted from Fivetran, it's not the data engineer's work. It's the people before that in the systems, in the production databases, or in the tools that people are using already. So they need to understand where the data comes from in order to be accountable for having clean data since the beginning, making sure everything is well structured at the beginning, and the expectation of what they will have as a product once it's structured, cleaned, transformed, and given as a dashboard by the data team. But I think it's interesting to think even a step further than just data producers and data engineers, but data consumer even before that, and giving that accountability is super, super important. So I like this idea as well.
I like that because it depends on what stage you are in that, overall data journey. It's around who is the producer. Is it the person entering the data? Is it the person who owns the data once it's in the warehouse? Is it the analyst who is transforming it and making sure it's in dashboards for the business users? Or is it those business users putting more data back into the systems? So maybe it's a little bit of a misnomer to talk about producers and consumers because it's an effort from everybody on the team. So thanks for that. And last call for questions. We've answered some throughout the session. So really appreciate those who have asked questions so far. If you have any burning questions, now is the time to ask. And in the meantime, I will ask Carson to close out with any sort of, advice you have for other data leaders or peers in the organization who might be kind of getting started or within their data democratization initiatives. Any sort of advice for them if they're looking to kickstart or level up?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marcella, but I don't know if I'm necessarily the one that has all the answers or has figured it out yet, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think this book has really been written yet, and we're all trying to make it better. Um, but I think looking at your data as a product would be a central theme here, um, and being intentional about that product. And then also having a little bit of vulnerability, I think, goes a long way because what we're attempting to do is to enable others basically to do our line of work that we do ourselves. So I think you have to be vulnerable there and say like, hey, this is a huge competitive advantage if we can harness this and leverage it the correct way, right? Um, so yeah, I just recommend people, being intentional, treat it as a product, and finally being a little bit vulnerable.
Awesome. Thank you. A little bit of vulnerability goes a long way, especially towards building those relationships with other people. So, with that, we don't have any more questions come through. Thank you for those who asked them. I hope we answered them well for you. If there's anything that was left unanswered, you can always reach out to hello@casterdoc.com. I will be manning that and can make sure that any questions are answered after the session as well. Until then, thank you, Carson and Tristan, for the time and insights. Really great discussion, and really appreciate you being here today. And with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, Carson.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marcella.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Tristan.
Have a great one. Bye.